We're making our way through. It's a big unexpected surprise and big unexpected grief. But, you know, we just didn't expect to lose both parents within, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's all right. We'll make it through, I think.
You will. You have each other. You have God.
Yeah.
As you always say, we're stronger than we think.
That's right. It's always easier to say that to somebody else than it is to believe it and live it myself. But
I know.
that's the joy of incarnational ministry. You're gonna give it out. You got to be able to live it out. So.
Well, but you know what I appreciate about you is that you are so real. You are human, and you display that, and you say, I'm floored. And yeah, I say it, but it's hard for me to believe it, and it's hard for me to, to preach it to you.
Yep.
And not believe it myself. So I'm going to tell you how I really feel, then I'm going to tell you what this means. And so I so appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, that's good, because that is what I do. I try to.
I know.
When I went to seminary, I told everybody I wasn't going to seminary to become a pastor. I wasn't. I was going to seminary to figure out what I believed. And it's really been no different. I mean, if it's beneficial to people, I like that. That's wonderful. But I'm still on a journey to figure out what I believe. And so I hope I can keep it that real anyway.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah. I want to say hello.
I don't believe the creed. I may not believe all the words because, they're his words.
Yeah. I think Colleen is here. Colette, are you here?
I wasn't expecting you to be here. That's the thing.
Well, why not? Well, you just kind of tuned.
Because you got a funeral coming up.
Yeah, I know, but I got to get some things in my life back in order, and so it's one of my regular things. So I'm glad to be here. We'll see who else thought that we might be here. So, how are you?
I'm actually indisposed at this moment, so you're going to have to look at the ceiling.
Okay, that's fine. That's absolutely okay. And Melinda is driving, so we just see an image of a shadow of a person from her. And I'm sitting here in my regular spot. I say hello to the online people who have joined in to hear and participate in that way in our discussion. Welcome to those of you who are on the live stream. And I think we're going to wait for a few other people. I think Debbie is coming, and I think Barbara, although I think Debbie and Barbara are together in Florida. Or maybe they're already back by now, because we weren't here last week. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. So I'm just going to orient myself here a little bit. I got myself all confused because it's been 2 weeks since we've done this, and I started thinking it started at 7:30. So I was over here messing around at 10 minutes of 7, and then I looked and I went, wait a minute, it starts at 7 o'clock. So here we are.
Well, at least you put it on and you wanted to see who was going to come in, and you were prepared.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Had some time to spare.
Yeah, well, I'm ready. I was getting ready this afternoon, so it wasn't like I didn't know it was happening. It's just when it was actually starting that was the interesting change. Here comes Debbie. I thought she might be here. Hi, Debbie.
Hello.
Hi, Debbie.
Hello. How is everyone? Is that Colette?
Hello.
That's Colette.
Oh, and Melinda.
Yep, it's
Hello.
Colette and Melinda. Yeah.
I tried to put a background on, but it failed.
Oh. How was your trip to Florida, Debbie?
Wonderful.
Yeah?
We had a really nice time. Yeah, and Barbara put me to work right away because she's volunteering with Restore down there. So we did that every day, but we had a whole bunch of other things. We were busy every day, so it was, and the weather, of course, was wonderful. So,
well, that's good.
yeah.
Except for a couple days, our weather hasn't been too bad here.
Loss.
Yeah. So I can't complain about the weather this winter.
No.
It's been very
Yeah,
mild.
it's
So
been
No, we've had some cold days, but the I shouldn't even speak it into existence. But that white stuff has been held back a lot.
Yeah.
yeah. I think I remember what you're talking about.
Judy Vernon was probably not going to be able to be with us. She had surgery. I can't remember whether she had hip or knee replacement, but she's home recuperating, and she's on medication that makes her tired, probably pain meds.
Oh, okay.
So
There it is. It is.
I knew
she may or may not be with us. Oh, there's Melinda now. We
there
see
she
you.
is.
Well, and the blur is because I don't know how to not have my video on. So if I move out of the way of the camera, you can see me. But if I come back in, then I'll get rid of the background. So I'm still work in progress.
Well, it's interesting. Anyway. All right. Do you know if Barbara's coming tonight, Debbie?
I thought she was going to be. She sent
Okay.
me the link, so I know she's aware of it.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, we'll just wait a few minutes then. We are, I think, if
And,
I remember right, we're starting Esther tonight, aren't we?
I thought we were supposed to. Isn't it Ruth?
No, Esther.
Esther.
I think.
Oh, yeah. Ruth was what we finished, isn't it?
No, wait. We finished Nehemiah.
We finished Nehemiah,
Yeah.
and we go into
Esther.
Yeah.
Esther comes next. Ruth was back a ways.
Well, I guess that's where my brain stopped.
Yeah.
Well,
I missed a couple.
yeah.
We've
Well,
missed it.
Ruth was such a lovely thing to read that it sticks in your mind.
Yeah,
And I
it's-
missed a couple of Tuesdays, and so I came back when you were finishing up. When we were finishing up Nehemiah,
Yeah.
and then we were off for a couple of weeks. So I just went right back to what I last remembered.
Well, Esther and Ruth are both refreshing change of paces in the world of kings and battle and conflict. So it's nice, although Esther has her part to play in this as well.
Well, I just hope it's time for Esther. I've been waiting.
Yes, I know you have. I know. You would tell us we're starting Esther when you knew we weren't. We always felt that little nudge. So I think as a wrap up to Nehemiah and a transition then, as it turns out, to Esther, is just to remind ourselves that in the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem and of the outlying areas and of the reconstruction of the temple, the people who end up doing all of that, in my opinion, later on the prophets will say they didn't learn their lesson, because they try to rebuild a more pure expression of the people of God on the planet, and in the end, some of their attitudes reflect some of the same old ways. And I think it kind of ends up that way. We're happy that they have the temple rebuilt. We're happy that they have been able pretty successfully to reconstruct the people of God with a place to live and a place to be prosperous and do well. But you can just tell their idea of, let's go back and rediscover the law. We must have gotten destroyed because we didn't obey the law. And their idea of the law is And we didn't follow the religious rites. We didn't keep pure race. We didn't separate ourselves from the people who were in the land. And we intermarried, and then as a result, we mingled in religious and cultural practices of people who did not know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And for that, they say that they were punished, and that the city was destroyed, the people were destroyed. And in order to get there, you really have to ignore an awful lot of their actual history. You have to ignore a lot of the warring that went on between the competing kings. And the alliances, not so much religious blending, but the alliances that were made with outside nations in order to advance their own civil war. I don't know. I see somebody else has joined us, but I can't see who it is.
Cheryl Green.
Yes, it's Cheryl.
Oh, hi, Cheryl. Let's see who else is here. We've got, Barbara's here too. She can't talk yet. There's Cheryl. Barbara's trying to get on. Hi. All right.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So, does anybody have any, some of you have been here every week. Some have joined in once in a while. Anybody have any comments or things that you've thought about as we've gone through Nehemiah and the reconstruction of the project of God? Any reflections, any thoughts, any things you can say, well, I learned this about that? Or comments that you want to make about what we read?
I didn't like it.
Agreed.
Well, you must not be a very good Christian then.
I guess not.
Well, what didn't you like about it? Let me ask you that.
It was too brutal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have been crying most of part of the day because of a book that we're reading for a book club, which showed the same absolute brutality, and then hearing that the town that my daughter works in was saved by the FBI from they were going to a white supremacist group was going to kill all of the electricity in Baltimore.
Right, I saw that story too.
Yeah, and it's just, there's so many sad things in the world. It's just terrible. I need Esther.
Yes. Well, and my prayers tonight are centered a lot on the people of Turkey and Syria. Right in the area in which we're reading about. I've been listening as much as I can. I've been listening about the stories about the people that were asleep, in 7-story buildings, and they were sound asleep, and the building vertically disappeared. It just went straight down. And that there's no hope of trying to, recover anybody because there's no equipment can get in, and it's just a terrible, terrible circumstance. My heart goes out to the people of Syria, which is already a war-torn area anyway. It's already destroyed in war and conflict. And Turkey, which is a very large and powerful nation, but this is a really big disaster. Really big. And I don't know, it's mind-boggling to think about people being trapped in buildings and the people outside hearing them call and no way to get into them, no way to get there. So
Sad. It's sad.
well, why don't we begin then by reading. I'm just going to say a little bit about placing this. Now, we have been reading in Ezra and Nehemiah. We've been reading about the far eastern country of Persia and some of Persia's goodwill towards the refugees of Jerusalem, and how the king of Persia makes this very magnanimous decision to support the people of Jerusalem and the surrounding area and rebuild their city and help them to rebuild their temple and to reestablish their identity. Cyrus had a reputation of being a very, very benevolent conqueror. He moved in and took over regions, but he sought to preserve the way of life of the people that he was including in his empire. This story takes place, it's placed in Persia, but I want to say right from the very beginning, it's fiction. This story is 100% fiction. And it is, yeah, I know. It's good fiction, and it teaches us a lot about the dynamics of the relationship between the Persian Empire when Ahasuerus was the king. And Esther, as you'll learn, we pay attention to her story because she's the queen. Now, think about that. There's a Persian emperor who has married a Jewish queen. And one of the reasons I think that, now this is me entirely, okay? I'm going to admit this. But think about the plan of editors who put the order of the Bible together that finishes with Nehemiah claiming that what God wanted was the purification of the races, and that why God would honor this new Jerusalem, this new Israel, is because they would make a commitment to see to it that they did not marry outsiders. Okay? So that seems to be the punctuation point at the end of this reconstruction. And what do we move to? We move to a book of Esther. And in moving to the book of Esther, we hear the story of a woman who's a Jewish woman who is going to be married to a Persian king. And the way God works through her, you're going to see God honors this relationship. God honors this marriage. This is exactly what Nehemiah said was the abomination that destroyed Israel to begin with. And so I just want to say that none of us really liked it much as those explanations were being unfolded, but now, my goodness, what do you think God makes of this? Here's a young Jewish woman in diaspora who's been carried away, and she gets the attention of and marries and is married to the Persian king. Well, now that's got to be an abomination, right? I mean, that's got to be the worst of the worst. Because now, none of this keeping things pure is happening at all. All right, so let's. I said that this is a fictional story, and there are clues to that in the story itself. That's not just because I made that up, and I'm not at a scholarly level to be able to lay out the evidence for you, but I will tell you this is a story that is told to illustrate what I think is the stronger theology that is going on among the people of God. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Would somebody like to read? Chapter 1 of Esther 1. Come on now, don't be bashful.
Well, I can't.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. You have the best excuse there is.
Oh, I'll read.
All right, Debbie, thank you.
This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Kush. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces were present. While he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by ordinance without restraint, for the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abaktha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. At this the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and custom. And those next to him were Karshena, Shethar, Adamtha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 officials of Persia and Media who had access to the king and sat first in the kingdom, according to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus, conveyed by the eunuchs. Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all the kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the officials, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, declaring that every man should be master in his own house. Yes, sir.
This is a beautiful piece of storytelling, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, really, I just love Queen Vashti. I mean, she just said no. It's almost,
I got a headache. Right?
it's almost like she's the first woman in history to say no.
Right.
And all the men are like going to fall apart because they realize that everything in their lives is going to crumble if it gets out that a woman can say no to her husband. I mean, it's just stunning. It's just stunning to me. And yet, I have to say, I mean, this is a story from ancient time, but I mean, you know, when I was growing up, there was a big movement in the sort of conservative church that said that, you know, the whole problem with the world, what was that guy's name? Bill? Basic family conflicts. The whole problem with the Christian lack of witness in the world is because men are not being men, and they are not putting their wives in place, and women are not taking up their role as being subservient to the men, and therefore the children are confused. It was the source of gay children and lesbian women, and it was the source of all corruption in the world.
Wow.
Yeah. And that wasn't so long ago. What was the name of that guy? Bill, oh man, I want to say Gollard. Basic Youth Conflicts. And he had a graphic that was, and this was popular. I mean, this swept through the white evangelical community especially, you know, as a sign of why the church had no message in the world. And he had this image that he used in his books, Basic Youth Conflicts. And teenagers went to the camps and they read these books. And it showed an image of the man as a hammer. So a hammer coming down on the woman who was the wedge. She was like the chisel. The woman was the chisel. The man was the hammer to the chisel. And the chisel came down, and the chisel then was to hew out something from the piece of coal that was the children. And that's how the biblical family was arranged. That, you know, that God was the one guiding the man with the hammer, and the woman was supposed to do what the man said, and if the woman obeyed what the man said, then the children would turn out to be just fine.
Isn't that the fundamentalist idea of how things should work in all religion? I mean, it's kind of a fundamentalist trope, isn't it?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
I mean, it's not so old because it's present today in fundamentalist churches and synagogues and mosques. That's the idea.
Yeah.
You know your place in the hierarchy of the family.
Yeah, and all confusion, all role model confusion, all, you know, criminal behavior among children, everything that was wrong in the world found its source in this confusion of roles of women in particular, but even more emphasis, wives in relationship to their husbands. And when that gets out of order, when that is not working, and that's where they would go back then, and they would paint, they do that barnacle painting back to the story of Genesis and Eve and Adam, and they say, you know, right there it is, right there in the very beginning. and they construct this whole idea around that when men are men, and men take up their role of ordering women around, and women submit and give in to that God-given structure of how the world is to be sustained, then the world will finally function the way it's supposed to function.
So it's on us again as women.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, and then there was that big men's movement. Well, the Promise Keepers. Promise
Oh, right.
Keepers out of California or Colorado said, no, it's not the women's fault. No, it's the men's fault for not taking up the role that they're supposed to take up. The Promise Keepers was, you were supposed to make a promise to be a man and to fulfill your role as the man, as the one who is the head of the household. And when you don't do that, then you are responsible for the decay of all of society. And then the argument, of course, which is the trump card, if you will, is that that's the biblical model of the family. That's it. That's what the Bible says. And you can go proof text it. You can find itty-bitty verses that seem to lend themselves to that very idea, and it'll make you quake in your boots when you see how they've lined up all the quotes from the Bible to show that, yes, in fact, this is what God wants. And if you think present-day society is crazy and has all gone to hell, well, I can tell you why right now. Tell you right now why. It's because of the breakdown of the order of the family. Women don't know their place, and men don't take up their role. Children are confused, they're disobedient, and the whole of society is falling apart. I think I should switch over and preach that.
Good luck.
Right?
I got
I mean, as just for those, you're here, you're women. Have you heard this? Do you hear this? Have people tried to put this on you in your life?
I think they know better.
Been there.
I've heard it. I've heard, everybody's heard this, Sure. Especially if you're a certain age, Even TV shows tried to reinforce. It was always a big ha-ha in those sitcoms if the woman actually had a role to play in, running the household. It was the man, and then the whole deal is let's get things on the right path. Ha ha ha! Look at that. She's trying to act like a man. All this jazz. I can't tell you how many sitcoms, even Andy of Mayberry, they had the girl who was trying to act like a guy. She was a tomboy. Oh no, we'll have to get her some cosmetics and then she'll know her place. Come on. Everywhere you looked back then, there was that maybe post-war idea that things should go back to the way they were in the good old days. And I think there's a certain sentiment about that even today, that people say, the whole trouble with the country is we got to go back to, the good old days, which were really not very good, but I don't know. But I don't think anybody's ever actually said that to me, personally.
Well, I know in the family I grew up in, the sort of older version of my mother and father, my father preached this as the gospel. He just absolutely did. He said there was no question about it. The man was in charge of the family. The man makes the decisions. And the problem, the reason I grew up as such a confused child is that my mother ran our household.
I was going to say, you knew your mother was,
I don't care what my father said. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he preached from the pulpit. It doesn't matter if, how's that phrase go? If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. My mother ran our household with an iron fist, and my father conformed entirely to what she said and what she wanted. Now, they had a funny kind of way of denying that in the way they talked about it. If you ask my mother would say, oh, I turn all the decisions over to your father because,
right.
He's the God-given leader of the family. But as I said, I said to my dad at one point, I said, well, I was a little older now, but I said to my father, I don't know who you're trying to kid. Like, and at one point when I was younger and I was questioning the whole thing, I said, I don't get this, Dad. Like, why is it this way? Why do men in marriage, and especially I heard my father in 100 marriage ceremonies warn the couples. He would warn them and he would say, that if you want to have a happy marriage, you will respect the fact that the man is in charge. And in the vows even, he would ask the man to be kind and be gentle in being in charge, and then he would ask the woman, do you promise to submit and follow in the way that your husband is going to lead you to go? And this was practical Christianity. This is how you knew you were a Christian. It didn't have to do with caring for the poor. It didn't have to do with stamping around at the courthouse demanding justice. It didn't. If you wanted to show that you were a Christian, you showed you were a Christian by buying into the hierarchy of how God had established order in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's backed up, the New International Version was printed the whole translation was done almost entirely to get at that verse in Ephesians chapter 7 where it says, women submit to your husbands. But what's really interesting is they put a paragraph break in and they didn't include the fact that right after that it says, husbands submit to your wives. And it's the same way that, it's love your wives by submitting to them. The same way that we submit to Christ and Christ submits to God. The whole image of Paul in that passage is about mutual submission of your way to a person that you love. It has nothing to do with male or female. But they construct on one verse, in one translation, they build a whole structure of what I call practical Christianity. How do you know you're a Christian? Well, you know you're a Christian because if you're a woman and you're frustrated with your life, well, you have to understand that your job is to just defer to your husband. And, if your husband's not standing up and doing what he's supposed to do, go to the pastor and tell the pastor, and then, they'll light a fire under the man's butt so he starts taking on his responsibilities. And then all will be well. All will be well. I had a professor early in the fundamentalist college that I went to for 1 year, who in front of the class announced that he was very glad that with all the confusion that was going on, that his son would never turn out to be gay. And we were like, well, what? And he said, yeah, my son will never turn out to be gay because I take up the role of the man in the household. And therefore, he will not be confused about his role in this world about how men are to behave and women are to behave. Let's women be women and men be men. And, some of us in the back of the class were by that time just laughing. Like, you have to be kidding me. That's what you glean from what we know about sexual orientation in the world today? It's caused by the absence of the father in the home. That's what causes homosexuality, in case you didn't know it.
Oh. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I mean, and the other theory which there was another young man that I knew who I said of him he was gay. He just said he was a homosexual. He didn't like the word gay. And he blamed his mother. He said that he was attracted to men because his mother was abusive and she turned his normal attraction to women away by her, inability to be submissive and to be a woman, so he was attracted to men. Like, okay.
I don't think that's true either.
However you want to put it together. And then, of course, the great, consummation of all this is they go to the Bible and they find it and source it in the Bible. These aren't just my ideas. These are God's ideas for how the family should be structured. So, I mean, I understand that this Vashti was just about ready to cause the collapse of this whole society by saying, no, I'm not going to be paraded in front of your rich friends and spin circles and impress them with my physical beauty just so you can climb up the social. No, I'm not coming. And the king's advisors say this could be the end of our society. A woman has said no, and word's going to get out that she did. I'm surprised you didn't kill her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am too.
Isn't that close to killing her by banishing her?
Yeah, actually, I think maybe you're right. That what did end up happening to her was equivalent to at least a social murder, to humiliate her and to have her lose all the position that she had as the queen, just because she said no. Any other thoughts? I'm surprised I'm not getting more conversation from you guys about this idea.
We've lived it for so long, thinking about how women have been denigrated and never considered that they had a mind, that they had the ability to do that. And I think religious institutions have been at the forefront of it. I remember Van Wolf saying that she thought the only reason she became an elder in the Presbyterian Church was because people thought she was a male, because her name was Van.
Is that right? So,
And that, there were still churches that not that long ago in our presbytery that wouldn't ordain women as elders, not mine as pastors.
That's why, isn't that why there's deacons? There's got to be a role for the ladies, right?
Right?
Nurturing, there's nothing wrong with being a deacon, but, I think that fell to women to be the nurturers and the folks who did the hospitality and did the house visits and all of that.
yeah, I had an older woman in my congregation in Ewing who I became good friends with, and she had been one of the first also of women ordained as an elder of all things. And she said that she found it really interesting that in the church, as she was growing up, women were allowed to serve every meal. Every single meal. Not only were they allowed to, but they were expected to serve every meal except the Lord's Supper. That meal they were not allowed to have their hands on. They were not allowed to touch. Which and
What? You mean, I don't understand. Why the men were not allowed to touch the food?
well, that part of what I said, meaning not allowed to touch the food, that's what the women did. That was the women's job, right? If we're going to have a potluck supper, you know who cooked the meal. The women cooked the meal. And if we're going to plan it, you know who's going to plan it, who's going to put up the tables and put the tablecloth on. Who knows what needs to be done? Well, it's all the women. The women are the ones that are going to do that. But then when it comes to communion, all of a sudden you see a very strange change in the role, that now it's men. It's men setting the table, although actually in some churches the deacons and deaconesses set everything up. They put the white tablecloth on.
Right.
They did all of the caring for everything, but when it came to serving it, oh no. No woman was allowed to be seen up there as the elder helping to assist with the celebration of communion. Nope. Because they were not allowed into that office. Because, I mean, why? Well, because what? Women are emotional. women, because, and they would again, they run back to the Bible, to a reading of the Bible, a kind of reading of the Bible. These are men who don't care about what the Bible says in any other area of their lives. But when it comes to finding resourcing for this, they'll run to the Bible. They say, well, we can't have Eve being in charge of communion. She can't obey the law of God. She's just weak. And, I have to say, as a male in the society, in the early stages of my life, I was surrounded by this kind of teaching as a part of Christianity. This is what Christianity meant. This is how you knew you were in the context of Christians, because they had this orderliness about men and women, and the roles of the sexes were very set, and that was Christianity. But, then I become a father, and I've got 3 daughters. And having 3 daughters and walking through this life with 3 daughters who are very outspoken and very strong-willed. And why? Because I wanted them to be. I had no interest in having, 3 daughters or my son who were going to be victimized by other people or to be put in place, especially in the name of God. And so my daughters grew up being very able to think critically about this kind of role that they were being forced into. My one daughter came to me after she had visited with my mother for a weekend, and I said, well, how was it? And she said, oh, Dad, I love my mom. She's just wonderful. But she was asking me about my life, and at this point, my daughter was a sophomore in college, and she said, my mom said to me, so do you have a boyfriend? And my daughter said, no. And my mom actually said this. She said, you might want to just give up on this idea of education, and you might want to pursue finding a husband with a little bit more passion.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Well, that was a generational kind of idea.
Yeah, it was. And for
Take care of you. As a woman, you couldn't take care of yourself.
right, that's right. You're making a big mistake trying to pursue a career for yourself, and then what you're going to be out there and you're not going to be able to support yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, my daughters didn't listen to that.
But wasn't that something that people believed, that if you went to college as a woman, you went there to find a husband, not to get an education, but to find a husband?
Absolutely. I think that was deeply ingrained in the whole experience of it. That's why you were there. Because if you wanted to find an ambitious, if you wanted to find an ambitious husband that was going to have a career and be able to support you, you should probably meet him in college.
Get your
As a junior in high school,
Yeah, right.
doing a speech saying the value of a college education for a housewife. And this was the topic that I chose.
Well,
That-
what was the value?
Oh my God. Well,
You're a smart homemaker, right?
never in a million years would I ever say, what are you, a homemaker? Oh.
Well, and again, I get these conversations, they happen, right? Different traditions, different cultures, they have different ideas of the roles of men and women, and I get that. That's an expression of humanness. and it's diverse. It's diverse around the world. But the part where my skin starts to crawl is when the community I grew up in had these kinds of values and these kinds of answers to life's questions, and they argued that they were God's point of view. This is how God has structured human life. And I can't even begin to think of the number of sermons that have been preached from preachers who are talking to congregations about the chaos of the world and the immorality of the world, and they go back to a passage of Scripture, and again, they ground the idea that the solution to these problems is to get back to the structure that God ordained, and that women are to be submissive to men. And I don't know, I mean, in the world I live in today, I don't hear it. It doesn't happen to me. It doesn't, I think my daughters they all work in corporations, and they work out in a world that, that would never be part of the formal teaching. But there are still the remnants of it that exist, and they bump up against it from time to time. When a male gets promoted, to a similar kind of promotion that they get, and then the raise for the male is more than the raise for the woman. They're still talking about how that happens all across our culture. I think it's changing. But if you travel into the conservative religious circles of Christianity, it is not changing there. It is not. And they critique the culture that is trying to change that as a godless culture that is basically breaking down the structure that makes the world work. And that someday God will punish us all for these terrible ideas we have, or for failing to follow what the Bible models as relationships between men and women. All right, let's read on. Let's see what happens.
After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint commissioners in all the provinces of his kingdom, to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in the citadel of Susa, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetic treatments be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in the citadel of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with King Jeconiah of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had carried away. He had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was fair and beautiful, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in the citadel of Susa in custody of Haggai, Esther was taken into the king's palace and put in the custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. The young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetic treatments and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen maids from the king's palace, and he advanced her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to tell. Every day Mordecai would walk back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. The turn came for each young woman to go in to King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their cosmetic treatment. 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics for women. When the young woman went into the king, she was given whatever she asked for to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she went in. Then in the morning she came back to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She did not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was admired by all who saw her. When Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. Of all the virgins, she won his favor and devotion, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet to all his officials and ministers, Esther's banquet. He also granted a holiday to the provinces and gave gifts with royal liberality. When the virgins were being gathered together, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her kindred or her people as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and conspired to kill King Ahasuerus. But the matter came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, both men were hung on the pole. It was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king.
Okay. So, any comments, reactions, thoughts about what you're reading?
Well, in addition to being submissive, if you're a woman, it helps your advancement if you're attractive.
Yes.
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 Have 6 months of myrrh and cosmetics.
Oh boy.
I mean, I get the feeling that somebody thought that women on their own stink.
Probably.
because, I mean, 6 months of perfumes. Really? What? Be absorbed into your skin? Wow.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, listen, some of the stuff women still do for beauty, it's just as torturous. Look at high heels. Come on, folks.
Yeah.
Remember the days of girdles and all kinds of crap? I know.
Sorry, I got my throat. One of the just in passing in the footnote gives an illustration of how you know this story is fictional. In chapter 2, verses 5 to 11, my footnote says, introducing two Jewish heroes, Mordecai and Esther. Mordecai is a name derived from the chief Babylonian god Marduk, and parallel to Esther's derivation from the goddess Ishtar. These divine names, however, were often used of people. The names in Mordecai's Benjamite ancestry link him to King Saul, while Haman's genealogy, and I don't follow all of what they're talking about, but the point is there's clues in the naming of the characters that tell you this is they say this is a story that never happened but happens all the time. This is a story that tells you what is going on in a truthful way, but it did not happen that these people did not exist. King Ahasuerus, by the way, they say is actually a code word for Xerxes. This is a code word for King Xerxes in Babylon or in Persia.
And I guess
Go ahead.
Esther and Mordecai are metaphors for the perfect father and the perfect daughter.
Yes, and I think modeling a little bit of the answer to the question, how did the Jewish people survive in these times of captivity? You know, what kinds of things took place? And here you have Mordecai adopting Esther and basically saying that, you know, she's my daughter because her father and mother died. So there's a kind of survival within the clan. And also notice the secret coding that goes on between Mordecai and Esther. You know, there's communication that goes on. And in this case, the communication from Mordecai to Esther that went to the king then saves the king's life. And you have this kind of almost like the story of Joseph. You know, Joseph rising up in power. So Esther becomes a Joseph type in Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph rose to power and became the right hand of the emperor, of the Caesar. No, the Egyptian pharaoh. And here is Esther now rising in favor and in growing in influence in King Ahasuerus' empire. She saves his life. She tells a plot against him, and they investigated and found it out to be true. But the big secret is she's Jewish. And here...
It doesn't explain why the eunuchs got angry at the king.
No.
That I understand.
Yeah, no, it doesn't explain that. I don't know. Maybe they were... I don't know. You can only guess, I guess. I was looking quickly in the footnotes to see if there was any clue. I don't think so. All right.
People made eunuchs to be servants so that they could not exist without whoever was leading them? Was that the purpose of castrating them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea was if they were castrated, then they could be left in charge of the harem. You know, you didn't have to worry.
Okay.
You didn't have to worry about this guy,
Right.
you know, going in and raiding the harem, and getting any of the young women pregnant. They were castrated and assigned then to that unique role of guarding the collection of women that belonged to the king. Which again, it's just, I don't know. Patriarchal societies insist on a virgin bride to ensure the paternity of children within the marriage. Contrary to the story here, Persian kings could marry women only from certain noble Persian families. But here you have a sort of Cinderella story that unfolds as they suggest, you know, send out to the provinces and have all the beautiful virgins assembled, and we'll have a beauty contest to see who wins the favor of the king. All you need is the story of the glass slipper. You've got Cinderella right to the T. What do you think? And maybe I'm just, I don't know. I want more explicit sex in the Bible, but I'll just listen to what I'm going to say now that I said that. When it says that her time came and she went into the king, does that mean that she went in, she had sex with him? Is that what that means?
I think that's implied. How else are you supposed to find which one you like best?
Okay.
After all. But then she would not be a virgin,
Right,
right?
right.
So, nor would all the other concubines that have gone. First they're virgins, then they're termed as concubines. So I guess that means they go into him and he goes into them.
Right.
And then he decides, and I guess, because the women are referred to as virgins until they go into him, and then it says they're concubines. So I guess that means he's had some,
Right. Yeah, because it says then in the evening when she went in, then in the morning she came back to the second harem in custody of the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubine. So now she's a concubine.
Yeah.
Because she's had sex with the king.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was not supposed to go back into the king again unless the king summoned her, was interested in her. Wow.
Seems like a good setup for if you're the king, I guess.
I guess. I don't know. Like,
Oh, gosh.
you know what it sounds like to me? It sounds to me like a lot like you watch these nature channels and you see the lion, the head of the pack of female lions, and they all travel together in a pack, and there's this one. It just seems like an animal structure to me.
Yeah, I think that's what people did. They looked around at nature and they said, well, that's the way things are supposed to be. So, it's okay for the male to have a harem. It's okay to have more than one wife. I mean, in biblical times, you were allowed more than one wife. So, I think they looked around and saw the way of nature, and that's the way they decided to set things up. And if you're a male and it's a patriarchy, it's good for you. So.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if this was true for the common people as well. Like, did the men of the village have multiple wives, or was this just a king's treat? Is this just like how a king got treated?
I think that in those times it was common for men to have more than one wife. It depends on how much you can afford.
Right.
How many wives can you afford?
Well, with the Mormons, did they not have multiple wives, but wives didn't have multiple husbands?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The women never have multiple husbands. You have to know who the father of your children are. But, in Islam, too, you're allowed up to 4 wives. Of course, the rest of the deal is, it says you have to treat them completely equal and provide for them equally. So that's kind of hard to do. So most people do not do that. But I know families where there's 1 and 2 wives for the same guy. It's against the law of the United States, but people still do it.
Really?
It never makes, in my estimation, for a good family life. There's always animosities, but
Well, I mean, as long as the man stays in charge and he just runs the household, then there'll be no problem, right? I mean,
yeah, but like you said before, it's really the women who run. Look, when you give the example of the lions, who is it who does all the hunting?
yeah.
It's the women, and they just bring the stuff to the male lion with the big mane. He just sits there and he waits till his dinner comes to him. Well, with the women, you can in these multiple families where there's multiple wives. To my thought, it never comes out right because you can never be completely equal. And the women make life really difficult for you because they will not cook for you, or they will not cook what you like, or they'll just be a pain in the butt every time you see them. There's ways women can make men's lives not so pleasant if they have a mind to. So, kind of happens.
Well, if he's not making them so pleasant, they don't have to go as frequently.
Right.
Are you
Yeah.
using that phrase of going into? Like,
In the biblical sense? Yeah. I don't know. I think probably most of us have read the book The Red Tent about the family hierarchy, and the wives, each male patriarch had several or sometimes many wives, and you get to hear a lot about the relationships between the wives. And I think, yeah, they can conspire to make the guy's life unhappy if they want to, if they've a mind to. I don't know.
well, again, it goes back to this idea that, if you're looking for the fundamental plan in life, it should be the man is in charge and the woman obeys what the man says. As long as you follow that rule, you'll have no trouble. It doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
Like, is everybody could just follow the biblical model? And I don't know. I think it's constructed out of a strange culture that has nothing to do with the Bible. I mean, here we're not in the place structured by God's law here. This king, which is, I looked in my notes and it says that he was trying out potential queens for 4 years. So, 4 years he was trying to make up his mind. Like, that's
Oh, what
phenomenal.
a terrible job.
And again, it's in the Bible, but it's not endorsed in the Bible as something that we're supposed to do or a way that we're to relate to each other.
Well, so that's what do they mean when they say, when all these people in Congress say, we want to go back to having biblical marriage. Well, what do you mean by that? It's like, really, this? I don't know.
And again, I think you'd be hard pressed. I don't, whether it's Esther as the model or any other women or any other men who are married. I mean, look at Abraham and his relationship to Sarah. Abraham and Sarah's relationship is not one I would pull out when I'm doing premarital counseling to talk to a couple about how they ought to relate to each other.
No.
It's not, and you can't find a marriage between a man and a woman in the Bible anywhere that is really a marriage you would like to hold up to emulate. So when we do premarital counseling, we don't pull model marriages from the stories of the Bible. We don't. And the reason we don't is because they don't exist.
Oh,
They're horrible relationships, many of them of imbalance and of brokenness and all kinds of problems that are related to it. And I think, now I'll get myself in trouble again, but I think it's why in the New Testament, they were trying to pull together a model of what would the ideal family or grouping of the people who are followers of Jesus, what would it be? And marriage is put down low on the modeling thing. Paul says, get married if you have to, if you're going to burn with rage or with sexual desire. Otherwise, be single.
Mm-hmm.
amen.
So, I mean, it's just, again, the thing that
But
just...
that was instruction for the males.
Yes.
That's not instruction for the females.
No, it's not.
Because your worth as a female is having children. And, that doesn't happen if you remain single, or theoretically it doesn't. So, again, I think it's so patriarchal that even the stories are not even considering things from the female point of view.
Although I always like to point out that most of the women that are named in the New Testament are not married. They're
Right.
not. They're influential women. Mary and Martha and the other Mary, these are not married women. These are not women that are known because of who they're married to. And Paul names 3 women who were influential in teaching him everything he understands about theology, and he names 3 women who are not married. These are well-educated women who are influential. They're wealthy women, Maybe they were married at one time, but if you're looking for a model of relationships, the model of relationships that is set out, especially in the New Testament, is egalitarian relationships of love. You know, it's not just an invention of modern times. It really is. The idea is that the model is love. I mean, the Old Testament idealizes and talks about one relationship that is maybe worthy of carrying an image of God's relationship to human beings is the relationship of a nursing mother to her nursing child. That the power of that connection with a good mother is worthy of understanding God's relationship to humans, to people. That like a mother, you know, who would not forsake her nursing child, this is how God loves the world. That's pretty powerful. But otherwise, the Bible is pretty absent of models of ideal relationships. And marriage is not really one of them. Yet, again, I just keep going back to my pedestal that conservative Christianity has said marriage is God's design for the world, and everybody should get married, and it's in marriage that you will find your true purpose and your identity, because then you will have children, and having children is really ultimately the purpose of marriage. And then that's for the population of the world, because the first commandment God gave to Eve and Adam was to be fruitful and multiply. But it's the only commandment I think we've actually managed to follow. We certainly have we certainly have multiplied, and we're still doing that.
Too much.
Yes.
Well, Lou, what do you tell young people who are going to get married as a model if you don't take someone from the Bible?
Well, I like to think that that the model I work from is actually a biblical model established by Jesus. Not necessarily for marriages, but for relationships in general. That egalitarianism in relationships is ideal. And what I mean by that is, I have a series of sort of marital inventories that I give couples, and they answer questions about their relationship. And I work from an egalitarian point of view. You know, the idea that, a good relationship is 50-50. It's 50-50. I don't care how you structure it, but if you don't win half the time, and if the other person doesn't win half the time, your relationship is not going to survive. It's not going to survive because you're human. And so we go into and we look, I invite couples to take a look at their relationship and to see where are the places where they don't insist on, I don't use the word egalitarian, but if you can see my hands, I usually use this model. I talk the model of the hands. That a working relationship, according to the Bible, is, I'll move a little closer because I know it. I'm pictured very small tonight. So I'm going to move in close. That I use this model, two people in relationship, and that what most human beings are longing for is intimacy. And intimacy is pictured like this. This is intimacy. But life is like this. As you move towards intimacy, you find conflict, and it blocks intimacy. And so where you meet the conflicts that block intimacy, the secret to a marriage is negotiation. It's compromise. It's being able to move from where you are a little bit to the left or the right that then allows intimacy to happen. And the problem that I run into with some relationships, and we try to find this in the relationships, is that a lot of times people, when they get to the point where they bump up against each other, one partner or the other will do this. They lay down. They don't carry through in the negotiation. They capitulate, which is, strangely enough, is the model for women that these fundamentalists have taught. The way to have a happy marriage is that when you're seeking to have a relationship, you should just lay down. You lay down. And when you do that, what I use the hand motions to show is it leaves this partner foundering. This is not intimacy. This partner is now lost in the relationship. And this partner here is suppressed, is lost as well. So that my father's idea of what the ideal marriage was, which was, well, you'll get along just fine. The male is always in charge and the woman is always submissive, is actually a relationship model that cannot exist because the man will find no contentment, wander off and find someone else to have relationship with, and the woman will not survive this way. Ultimately, she will find her own way of getting power in the relationship, and it's usually through a subversive model. So I take couples into an analysis of their relationship and ask them if they will tell stories about how they relate to each other, and I try to increase their awareness of the pattern of their relationship. Because I do believe the biblical model, here now I go, right, the biblical model, but I think, this is what love does. Love seeks the well-being of the other person. But it doesn't disappear. If you disappear in your relationships and you become invisible, you're not in a relationship anymore. Barbara, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Try again. But that's not, you're saying all relationships, that has to be
I think
way survive.
I think that's the idea that comes from, I took family systems and I studied family systems, and the idea is that, a relationship that survives is where you win 50% of the time. It may not look like you win 50% of the time, and you may have to use my mother's tactics for how to win 50% of the time. If my father made a decision and my mother didn't like, we were having a different meal for supper than we were planning on having. I mean, there was no way around it. Now, nobody named it, nobody said it, but my mother knew how to win 50% of the time. I think, in my experience, my mother won about 70 to 75% of the time, which is why it was a good thing my father had the church. Because my father could go off to the church and he could be in the church and he could be the pastor in the church and be in charge in the church, and he could win 60 to 70% of the time in the church community. But when he came home, he was not, he might be the pastor, but he is not in charge in this household. He is not. And the thing is, I know other people do it differently, but when my mother was angry, it was hell at home. It was hell. And there were 9 of us in the family. And so if you were the one that made mom angry, then you also got it from all the siblings. What did you do? You wrecked it for us tonight. She had her own squad to reinforce that you should have obeyed what mom said. But I still believe, I go back then and I do what the others have done, and I think that in the biblical model of Adam and Eve and Adam, that there was an amazing egalitarian between those two. Both before and after the search for knowledge and the quest for all of that, I don't think the Bible puts them into a hierarchy. It does not. But, we have to do a study again of Genesis for me to lay out my arguments about that. I think now in a male-dominated religious culture, we go back and we rewrite that story. We rewrite it. We put glosses on it that really cover over what it actually teaches us about the equality and the egalitarianism between the sexes that was really a big part of the ancients. They were not nearly as male-dominated as our cultures are today. Not nearly. Eve was a very, very powerful woman who was allowed to represent all of human beings. She was the mother of us all. She was not just representative of women. And if she made mistakes, they were mistakes that people make. They were not just the mistakes that a woman makes. Did that answer your question, Colette?
Yes, I like that.
What I keep thinking, though, is the relationship between children and parents. And I know in our family it has evolved quite a bit.
Yeah.
From the time when I would never question anything my parents said to where my kids would question, but they'd still go along, to my grandkids, who I think are a lot more able to get their own way. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm not sure if that's typical or if it just happened, it's a personal experience.
I mean, I would jump in and say I think it's very typical. In fact, I think it's a trend. A lot of people don't like it. But I think, I go back to what makes you happy in life and what are clues in your life that things are a mess. Life is chaotic and relationships are full of chaos. And again, we have for a long time had a model, especially with children, that children, it isn't really that long ago that children were not to speak. They were not to speak. They were to sit at the table, they were to be happy they were being fed and clothed, and they were to be quiet, and they were to do what they were told. And I get it, okay, that's an idea people had, or a way of ordering, of finding order, but I don't believe for a minute that is a sign that all is well. I, for one, I have to admit, I can say it now because my kids aren't the age, but man, it drove me crazy, my kids' determination for me to hear what they had to say, to ask their questions, and man, I just wanted to say to them, just be quiet.
Do what I tell you.
Do what I tell you. Just do what I tell you and behave and obey the rules.
Right.
I tell one of my, I lived in a small town, and it was a small high school, and all the teachers and the superintendent of the school knew me. I was a pastor of the big Presbyterian church, and so when my kids got in trouble in school, man, they called me in, and I would come in, and my children, there were times I just wanted to say to my kids, can't you just go to school and shut up and just do what you're supposed to do? But, my kids were constantly getting involved in social justice struggles. At one point, the superintendent of the school tried to force everybody to wear a certain name tag that identified whether you were a documented person or an undocumented person. Yeah, they were making name tags up so that you can know the difference. Well, my daughter led a revolution, literally, in the school where she rounded everybody up and they took all their name tags and threw them up on the flat roof of the school. To which then the superintendent was ready to kill her and then called me in so that I could then yell at her. And I looked at him and I went, I'm absolutely not going to yell at her. I don't care what your rule is. I don't.
That's like wearing the Star of David on your
I
sleeve.
know.
I mean,
And
come on.
yeah, and my daughter, who mostly was friends with undocumented people, was incensed. She's like, "You're not doing this." So, and then another favorite of mine was that my daughter Megan, she liked to wear really short skirts, and I used to tell her all the time, "You can't go out dressed like that." And then she would go anyway. Well, this one day, I got a call from the assistant principal, a woman, who called me and said that I need to come to high school and bring a change of clothes for my daughter. And oh, I was mad. Oh man, I was so mad. And so I go in, and the assistant principal's in her office, and she's sitting behind her desk, and she explains to me that, you know, there was a measure thing about it had to be your fingertips or whatever, and that my daughter's dress was higher than the code. And with that, the door opens, and my daughter walks in, and she's mad, and she sits down, and the vice principal, very teachily, says to her, "Now you know you violated the code," and my daughter is mad. She's just sitting over there, and she's mad. And I looked at her, and I said, "Megan, what are you so angry about? Your face is red." And she said, "Dad, would you ask the vice principal to stand up?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Go ahead, ask her to stand up." And when the vice principal stood up, her skirt was shorter than my daughter's. So, like, and I'm not making that up. That is a true story. And so my daughter says, she pulls the clothes out of my lap and says, "Let's go home, Dad. I'm going to go home and change my clothes." And she turns to the vice principal and says, "I guess you'll be leaving too." Like, so to your point, Barbara, do kids talk back more? Oh yeah, they talk back more. They do. But honestly, when I got home, I told my daughter how proud I was of her. I said, "I'm proud of you. Like, I don't want you to wear short skirts, but I'm proud for what you were willing and able to do in terms of seeing and saying what you see." So I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I mean, I know the reason I'm bald is because my kids never shut up. They would just never just simply do what they were told. And, they were the preacher's kids, so everybody knew, what the preacher's kids were doing. And they knew that the preacher did not know how to control his children. But in some of those incidences, I was proud. I'm proud of my daughters. I'm proud of the individual sort of, the Vashti revolutions that my daughters have carried out so far in their lifetimes. Because they have said no. They have. They have said no to when they see the hypocrisy and whatever else they just won't go along with. They have said no. I'll say this as a tag, but I think the truth is that they end up in relationships with men who know how to behave and do what they tell them to do. So that may be the consequence of it. I don't know. So Vashti is one of the women heroes of the Bible. When they do studies of women in the Bible and they go through and they tell the untold stories of women, Vashti is a hero. She stands out as a woman of strength who said no. She didn't get killed, but she lost everything that was a part of the creature comforts of her life. Okay. Well, anybody have any last comments before we say goodnight?
Is that all there is of Esther?
Oh, no.
More.
No. The big moments for Esther are coming up. We've got there's 7,
Bad guy.
8. There are 9 chapters in Esther. We did 2.
Okay.
Yeah, Esther becomes a kind of Vashti type. You'll see there's a lot that's going to happen here in 9 chapters, but it becomes very important. I didn't say this in the beginning, but it's important to know that in this story, again, God is not mentioned.
Right.
But you are to be, I think the implication is that you are to see the movement of God in the people. You're to see the hand of God in their lives. And I think that even extends to the Persian queen, Vashti. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. As some of you I will see tomorrow morning. You're all invited to come tomorrow morning at 10 if you can. Or I will see you next week here where we will continue the story of Esther. Okay?
You mean like tomorrow morning, the Bible study?
Yes, tomorrow morning the Bible study where we're reading in Isaiah. We are continuing in the book of Isaiah. Okay? All right.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Good night. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.